Hi Rob, how are you?
Hey, Pablo. Good. How are you?
All good, all good. Thanks for coming to the podcast.
Yeah, man, of course. Thanks for inviting me. Is it your name is Pablo, right? I just saw in the email because it's different on Twitter.
Oh yeah, in Twitter I put like my last name with
Uh,
like some changes,
It's like
but yeah, my name is Pablo.
frozen.
It's so great to talk to you. I've been your following. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, it's better now. Okay, yeah, you were
Oh
frozen
yeah,
earlier, but yeah, it's fine now. Okay, yeah, just
yeah,
wanted to ask. So your name is Pablo, right? I just want to make
yeah,
sure. Okay,
yeah,
okay,
Pablo.
got it. Yeah. All right. Yeah, the internet connection is not great. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
going to be an issue. Oh, it's
let
okay now, but
let me change it to see if it's better because I don't have a problem here. Mm,
okay,
I already changed it. Let's hope that works better.
okay, sure.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
yeah, I've been following your Twitter for a while, and I heard several of your podcasts you've been on. It's great work. I really like it. Thanks for doing it.
yeah, of course, man. Yeah. I started that Twitter account. Oh, it was like 2017. I just started sharing things that I was reading and making some commentary here and there. But yeah, within the last year or so, it really started to take off and get some interest from people. And yeah. So it's been great to see the response and yeah, to talk about this stuff. I mean, to me, psychology is endlessly fascinating. So yeah, I'm always happy to talk about it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I think we can dive into like psychology topics. But first, I would like I know all your story, but many people don't. So if you want to give like a brief overview of who you are,
Yeah.
where you're studying, everything.
Oh yeah, sure. Can I ask? So how long do these things usually go for you? These interviews?
Well, we can do it for about an hour or less or a little bit more, however you want.
Okay, yeah. An hour sounds like a good benchmark. Yeah, sounds good. Um, but yeah. I mean, just to talk a little bit about my background and where I came from. Um, yeah, I've written about this in multiple outlets, the New York Times, the New York Post, and others. But yeah, I mean, I was born in LA. My mom, she was an immigrant from Korea, and yeah, she basically wasn't able to take care of me when I was a small kid. So she got addicted to drugs and just wasn't a very attentive mom. So I ended up getting put into foster care, um, in part because we also didn't know who my dad was. So mom was addicted to drugs, didn't know my dad, spent the first few years of my life in and out of foster homes. I spent something like, I don't know, let's see, 5 years living in like 7 different foster homes. Um, then yeah, just later was adopted, spent some time, with this adopted family. So originally I grew up in LA, this is in California, later adopted into this small town in Northern California called Red Bluff. Um, Very rural town, population's like 13,000. Um, Although like my adoptive parents were, probably like lower middle class, maybe working class, the town itself, there was actually a lot of poverty. So at least relative to the United States as a whole, Red Bluff had like twice as many people living under the poverty rate. The median household income was like $27,000 a year. Like this is, at least within the United States, this is considered like a very poor town. Um, and so, yeah, this was just the kind of people I grew up around. My adoptive parents later got divorced. Um, yeah, I got into a lot of trouble just living in these different unstable uh, homes as a kid. I just I wasn't interested in what adults had to say. I was very skeptical of authority. I didn't like teachers. The way I think about this, why, even though I was kind of a curious kid, I liked reading, I liked learning. but I had this instinctive mistrust of adults simply because I had never had reliable parents in my life. And so I just assumed that all adults were unreliable, probably lying, probably untrustworthy in some way. Yeah. And so if they said, do your homework, or, it's important to get good grades, or, whatever, I just didn't take it that seriously, kind of did my own thing. By the time I was a teenager, I was doing a lot of stupid things. I mean, I was doing drugs. I was like stealing cars. I wrote about this story when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I lit this girl's house on fire with my friend. Yeah, just a lot of like really kind of reckless stuff, man. Like drinking and driving. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of times I should have gotten in more trouble than I did, but just got really lucky. So yeah,
I
man,
found,
just,
sorry
yeah, go
for
ahead.
interrupting you, but I found it really interesting. You tweeted about all the protests that are going on in the United States, and you said like,
Yeah.
if me and my friends were adolescents in that time, we will like destroy everything, but not because we believe in the movement, but because we didn't believe in anything. So I found
Yeah.
that really insightful.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to this. I mean, I actually just wrote an essay about this. It should be out pretty soon, but yeah, man. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about these protests and these demonstrators in the U.S., the looters, the destruction, and thinking like, yeah, this is kind of ridiculous, especially the arsonists and all the extreme aspects of the movement. But we started thinking like, if this had happened in like, I don't know, 2007, we would definitely be out there, like, with baseball bats, with airsoft guns, like like knowing that there wouldn't be any cops to do anything about it. It would have been a lot of fun actually, in that sort of nihilistic, like, you know, let's go destroy something, and almost like, yeah, I want to say almost get back at the sort of authority that let us down in a way, to just like light it on fire and destroy it. Um, so I sort of understand that impulse. And yeah, man, I mean, we even the way we treated each other, my friends and I mean, we were awful even to each other, just like playing pranks on each other, like physically like hurting each other. Like one of us would be asleep and the other one would go like right up to his chest and fire a paintball gun, like right into his chest. Um, just like really brutal stuff. And yeah, I mean, young male friendships, I think, are strange in that kind of environment. So in any case, yeah, later on joined the military. Um, yeah, and sort of like matured a little bit, learned about how to be an adult, how to be more responsible. And also I think just spending time in an environment that is very rigid, with predictable rules. It constrains like the worst impulses of young men, right? Because like you have this very powerful structure around you to almost make sure that you don't get into trouble, because with absolute certainty that if you do something, this is what will happen, and it's guaranteed, right? Like there's like a tradition and a history and very strict like laws. Like military members are actually under a different legal code in the US. So if you don't show up to work, you can literally be thrown in jail. So like basically if you don't adhere to your responsibilities, like there will be very fast consequences and life will change in a very bad way. And I think that kind of environment, not for everyone, but at least for some kinds of young guys, young males, that's actually good for them. It was good for me anyway. And then yeah, so after the military, went to college on the GI Bill, ended up going to Yale. Yeah, now I'm at Cambridge as a PhD student. And yeah, it was just a sort of long, circuitous, indirect path to education. Took me a while to come to terms with, how to be a good student, and even like, yeah, grasping or sort of understanding what it means to be a smart person. I think I also had like some, I guess like this apprehensive feeling about like embracing my curiosity in that way, because it just wasn't something that was rewarded where I grew up. So
Yeah, I think that's a big part. Like you do what people reward you. So if that type of behavior is not rewarded, like you don't do it as naturally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for sure, man.
yeah, but
Yeah.
that's a fascinating story. Thank for sharing it with us.
Mhm.
And one thing I want to ask you to talk about, like you did a lot of crazy stuff and you get away with it. I think it's in part because you were a smart guy. And I think, I don't know what you think about it, but I think like when a smart person goes through a bad path, he becomes like 10 times more dangerous than a normal person. So I'm glad you you got in a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like when I think back to some of the things that we did, a friend of mine in the military once said like, so even in the military, there are very strict rules about drinking. So you actually can't drink if you're under 21, even in the military. But we still did. Like my friends and I, you know, I was 17 when I joined, and I turned 18 while I was still in training. Um, and then yeah, like when I was living on base with like my military friends, we would just like yeah, it wasn't that hard to get beer, get drunk, whatever. And my friend said like even though we're being stupid, we're being smart about it. Like there's a smart way to be
Yeah.
stupid, right? Like if you're gonna break rules and take risks, there you can be smarter about them and how you approach them and to at least try to make sure you don't get caught. So yeah, it's an interesting point because I do know guys who weren't smart about being stupid and like ended up getting thrown out of the military. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
there, as you say, there's a smart way of being stupid.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, just to close up with this topic, I took a quote you said in the podcast of Cognitive Revolution that I really
Hmm.
like. You said like the military is essentially a prison, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think you were going like, oh, it's a prison, and it's so, but you said like, no, it's actually good for me.
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, like basically, your first like your like basic training is essentially jail. It's actually worse than jail in a lot of ways because like in jail you're not getting yelled at to do push-ups and right, and so in some ways it's worse. And then like the next few months it's like you're on parole, like you're watched very closely until you sort of like make rank and sort of prove yourself and like sort of rise up in like the military structure. You're basically treated like garbage, right? Like you're treated like not responsible, like you're an idiot, and they like watch every single thing you do. And I think yeah, if you're 18 and you've never had like you've never learned responsibility or structure or you know learned why rules are important, then that can be actually that can be very beneficial, I think, for sure. So yeah, I mean, it's worked for me. It's worked for some of my friends too. Another friend of mine at Yale, he graduated, you know, a year after I did, but he went through the Marines, and it was the same thing with him. I mean, he was a troublemaker, got in a lot of trouble, got arrested, and yeah, the Marines kind of helped rehabilitate him. So yeah.
And right now, your PhD, you're doing it in psychology. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're like developing this theory of luxury beliefs.
Yeah, yeah. So that's you know sort of loosely related to the kind of work that I'm interested in my PhD. So luxury beliefs started off as like this side projects unrelated to my academic research, but now they're slowly starting to kind of come together. Um, but yeah, so here at Cambridge, doing a PhD in experimental social psychology, also evolutionary psychology, like basically the ways that other people can affect us and our behavior, the way that we think, and also bringing in some of the sort of evolutionary theory arguments for you know, why we are the way that we are, why we behave the way we do, why other people and other sort of external factors can affect us so much. Um, and so, yeah, the luxury beliefs idea, it's it's basically like this. It's a little bit of sociology, it's a little bit of psychology, but the basic idea is that people in general care a lot about social status, essentially like the esteem in which we're held in the eyes of others. Um, and so basically like, I mean, there are two aspects of social status, you know, so there's one aspect which is dominance. And this is essentially like the ability to impose costs on someone, physical costs in particular, sort of the ability to hurt people, to take what you want from them. And then the other aspect of social status is prestige, which is basically like status that's willingly conferred. So the difference between these two things would be like, one would be like, you know, some like really big tough guy with a gun. That guy has some kind of status because he can take things. And then the other would be like, let's say, you know, like a very old wise person, right? Like that person has status, not because he can hurt you, but because he has wisdom, he has knowledge. You appreciate the way that this person thinks. And I actually once saw this tweeted, the difference between these two. Another way to think about it is like dominance is what someone can take from you, and prestige is something, and prestige is what someone can give to you. And so, yeah, basically someone who has prestige, they have knowledge, they have talent, they have something interesting that you can sort of consume or partake in some way. And so anyways, a lot of people care about these things, right? And so a lot of people care about these things, especially status, right? So how we're viewed in the eyes of others. And so this is more drawing on the prestige element. How do we obtain prestige from our peers? And who cares about these things? So there's some interesting research showing that, you know, although everyone cares about status, the people who care most about status are actually people who already hold high positions in society. So, you know, people who are in like these white collar, high socioeconomic status, you know, went to a fancy college, these kinds of people, if you ask them questions about, you know, how important is it that you're, you know, looked at with appreciation, how important is respect, and so on, like just generally, how important is it that you are viewed positively in the eyes of others? They actually care more about these things. And wealth too. They actually care more about wealth and status. So people who already have a lot of these two things care more about them. And in some ways, you can imagine this makes sense because for a lot of them, that's actually how they got to those positions in the first place, right? If you're the kind of person who cares a lot about wealth and status and you work really hard and, you know, you go to the right college and become a lawyer or something, like, yeah, then you take this questionnaire, of course, you're going to care a lot about those things. So this helped me to make sense of what I was seeing at Yale, and I have friends at other sort of, you know, these kinds of colleges, Ivy League schools. I mean, these students, man, are just like obsessed with like, I mean, first like obsessed with getting in there in the first place, and then like getting the right internships, you know, going to the right musicals. You know, I recently like, you know, sort of observed that Hamilton, when I got to Yale, Hamilton was the biggest thing ever. I mean, everyone had to get tickets, and tickets were like were $400 back then, like cheap tickets to see Hamilton, $400. And whatever, like getting into law school, getting into medical school, just, you know, who was vacationing where did you summer, like whatever, who's going to the Hamptons, updating Instagram with the perfect picture, with the perfect caption. I mean, I've seen girls, and not just guys too, like, yeah, girls and guys, whatever, men and women, post something on Instagram with the right filters, the right everything, and then spend an hour on Google trying to find the perfect literary quote to attach to that picture in the caption, you know, like, oh, I need a quote from Faulkner or George Eliot or one of these fancy people to make sure that this picture is perfect. So I didn't really see that anywhere else, this obsession with looking good and impressing people. And so the luxury beliefs idea extends this beyond just material goods, you know, what brand your jacket is or what name is on your diploma, but also what you believe, what your opinions are, your thoughts, your habits, your customs, your social manners. And so one way that people can distinguish themselves is basically what their opinions are on social issues. And a way to indicate that you're a member of this privileged class is to have opinions that are distinct from a middle class person or an ordinary person. So at least in the American context, you know, if a middle class person believes X, and, you know, I'm this status anxious person at Yale and I want to make sure that no one confuses me for someone like that. I should, believe in something else. And eventually, I think this creates an effect such that now you have this, elite class of people who are status anxious and who have to hold unusual and strange beliefs. And one motivation for that is to simply signal their social class, hold these luxury beliefs in the same way that in the past they used luxury goods to distinguish themselves. So in the past, they might wear a powdered wig or have a pocket watch, some kind of material item. And today they express themselves and hold this, strange political opinion that no one who didn't attend a fancy college could have. And we can get into like some of the examples and specifics if you want, but this is the general overview, is that people will now express beliefs and opinions to signal that they went to the right schools for social status.
And don't you think it can happen the other way around? Like someone, maybe because they don't care so much, it doesn't, but someone from the middle class or lower class, they don't want to have the same beliefs as the upper class just because they don't want to be like related to them in some way. Don't you think this can happen?
That's an interesting question. I think for a lot of people, that's probably true. Yeah, I think that probably does happen, that this, especially now, there's this sort of skepticism towards the elite and kind of populist movements and so on. But I would say even today, on average, people want to be seen as educated, as sophisticated, as smart. And one way to do that is to basically adopt the beliefs of the upper class. And so a lot of people do this, right? And it's not even necessarily conscious. It's not like, a middle class person hears someone and they're like, oh, that's what you have to believe. But it's just unconscious. Like, you just understand that person holds status. And if you mimic that person, you can obtain some of that prestige. Also,
you share something. You share something about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that, like, not only that, but like the people who wield the most social and political influence tend to be members of this prestigious class. So people who create television shows, movies, pop culture, podcasts, books, whatever, those beliefs are going to trickle in to the media that we consume and the content that we consume. And so even if you're this middle class person who doesn't want to, associate with the elite, you're going to absorb those beliefs through the shows you watch, for example.
Okay. Yeah, I heard something about recently, like now everybody wants to be Joe Rogan and have their podcast and dress like him and be like him and fight. So I think that's an interesting example.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, in a way, yeah, Rogan has a lot of status, especially in the podcasting realm, right? Like, he's what people call him the king of podcasting now. I mean, I know a lot of people who, who basically admire this guy a lot, and for good reason. And so, yeah, it makes sense that they would want to sort of mimic him in some ways.
Yeah, because I think he's a more relatable person. Like, he's smart, he talks to smart people, but he's also like a normal joke, to put it in some way. So I think that's why people admire him.
What a fortunate name. I mean, his name is literally Joe.
Yeah.
Like the most like normal, ordinary name. So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. That's well, do you want to, you said you have like some specific cases, maybe you want to talk about something you've seen or something?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of different examples. So I gave a few in my New York Post article from last year. One, for example, would be, a simple example would be like religion. So if you look at who tends to be like who's most likely to profess that they're an atheist or a non-believer in the US, they tend to be disproportionately educated people. People who went to college. And you can also see this in like, a lot of, educated circles. There's this, well, on the one hand, there's this like skepticism of religion, of like, it's kind of silly, it's kind of superstitious, but maybe it's good for the masses or something. And then on the other hand, there are people who like straight up say that it's bad for people, that it's, clearly outdated, it's backwards, it's naive. And so I think that, they're basically sort of distancing themselves, like lifting themselves or sort of separating from religious people by saying like, that's silly, we're not going to believe that. But I think this can create harm. So my actual definition of luxury beliefs are, ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while, taking a toll on the lower classes or causing some harm to them. And I think by slowly removing and denigrating and eroding the role of religion in society, you're actually hurting like the poorest people, right? Like there are a lot of people who, churches are like their social centerpiece. I mean, in their neighborhoods. I just read this book by Chris Arnade, Dignity, Life. It's like something like Seeking Dignity in Back Row America, something like that, by Chris Arnade. Good book. And he goes into these poor neighborhoods all around the U.S., different ethnic groups, like poor white people, poor black people, Hispanic, whatever. And, one common thread throughout all of them is that like religion and church are very important, right? Like a lot of them are addicted to drugs or like, survivors of abuse, trauma, whatever. And like God and religion and the Bible and whatever, like this means a lot to them. And so I think like, yeah, spreading this belief that religion is not useful or it's suspicion, superstition, I think it can be harmful. Another example I think would be let's see, like this like polyamory. I think this movement is actually like, I think it's incredibly misguided, depending on what your aims are, I guess. But I view polyamory as the latest manifestation of this movement towards sexual freedom that, depending on who you ask, some people say it began in like the 1960s in the US at least, this movement of like, whatever, throwing off the patriarchy and marriage is oppressive and let's just have free love. And so this polyamory, I was talking to my friend, this was last year. He told me that when he set his Tinder radius to, I don't know what it was, like 5 kilometers or something around his university, it was all female students he was matching with and seeing their profiles. And he said something like half of them had something about being like polyamorous or, open relationship, open whatever in their Tinder bios. And then when he extended the radius to 15 kilometers to include, the rest of the town and the outskirts and, not the students, he said like half the women were like single moms, right? And I think that's not a coincidence. I think that when you champion sexual freedom, you're sort of removing certain cultural guardrails to sort of help people like channel their desires, say, into something that's generally more beneficial for children and for families. And so if your only aim is to satisfy your own sexual desires, then I guess, whatever, polyamory and all that is great. But if you want to have like a good society for children and for families, that's not going to be a good environment, simply because like if you look at the research and the data on abuse rates, neglect rates, and so on, and like not only that, but like also a likelihood of going to college, future earnings, all of this stuff, children who grow up in single parent homes or in broken homes or with step parents, like the statistics are just abysmal. One of the most shocking statistics, so this is it's called the Cinderella effect in evolutionary psychology. If a kid is raised in a family with a step parent, especially stepfather, I think it's specifically stepfather, it's something like up to 700 times more likely to be killed by a step parent than by their birth parent. And then like the statistics on like single mothers who have live-in boyfriends. A lot of like live-in boyfriends don't really care about the children, so they're either extremely neglectful or they're like overtly abusive. And so basically, when a child lives in a home with adults that aren't his or her parents, the odds of that child being hurt in some way multiply by like several orders of magnitude. And so if you want to have polyamory and you're going to have like 5 guys living with one small kid, what are the odds that all 5 of them are going to love this kid and not hurt it in any way? I don't know. But the statistics indicate probably not great. And so I think there's this like short-sightedness to that a lot of elites don't have, but it's cool, it's trendy, right? Like, you know, you'll read op-eds in the New York Times about whatever, polyamory is great, it works for me and my family, whatever. And maybe it can. This is another thing. I think that if you are an educated person, you're smart, self-control, you can sort of plan and think ahead and whatever, you have the resources and the means to do this, then maybe you can have like whatever 3 wives and 4 husbands and some unusual family structure, and you could maybe be okay. But if you are, you know, living in a poor environment, poor community, you don't have resources, you don't have means, you just are less capable of navigating these unusual relationship structures, and you're far more likely to be hurt in some way by this. And so, you know, if you're a member of the credentialed, privileged class, and you're talking about how great polyamory is, maybe it'll work for you, but it won't work the same way for less privileged people.
Yeah, this idea, polyamory, how do you say it? I know it in Spanish, the word, but yeah.
Wait, what is the Spanish word?
Polygamia.
Polygamia, okay.
And I found this topic really interesting. I read Homo sapiens, Sapiens from Yuval, and it talks about the agricultural revolution and how we live when we were hunter-gatherers. And I really found interesting, like that specific part, the hunter-gatherer part. So I read another book that's called Civilized to Death. I don't know if you know Christopher Ryan.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
And that book was really great, and he talked about that, like polygamy, but it's on, like, I think it works and it's a good idea, but if you live in an indigenous tribe in the woods, because in there you don't have contact with any other person, like it's not like my kid or your kid, it's like the kids, and it's not like you have a mom and a dad, everybody is your mom and your dad. So I think it works in specific cases, like the lifestyle we live on right now maybe doesn't so well, but the idea is good and it sounds good on paper, but when you translate it to this reality, I think it doesn't work. But the idea is good, and it catches your, like, whoa, it's interesting if you like get raised by a lot of, like, if they love you like a son, like a lot of men and a lot of women, it sounds good, but in here with the property and everything, it's hard.
Yeah, I've actually heard that. Yeah, that's some like foraging tribes. They have like these kinds of, you know, different kinds of family structures and stuff. And yeah, I haven't looked that closely into it, but yeah, I mean, I have paid pretty close attention to the statistical data, you know, in regards to like Western countries like Canada and the US. And yeah, I mean, basically like the outcomes for children are really, I mean, it's really something. I mean, like for foster kids, for example, like, you know, something like only 3% of foster kids graduate from college. And, you know, and one of the things about being in foster care is that, like, you know, to become a foster parent, you actually have to have like a relatively decent home and environment, right? Like the state isn't going to put a kid in like whatever, a hovel. They have to be like up to a certain standard. So in terms of like material comfort or access or whatever, foster homes aren't like that bad. I mean, it can be a little bit bad when you have like 10 kids living in there, but they're not that bad, right? So there's no poverty for a foster kid. But when you're moving to a different home every 2 years or whatever it is, and you're living with different families in different homes, and like just that general instability of like no parents, that creates, you know, basically it creates like this sort of mental burden for kids, which is why only 3% of them graduate from college. And then if you look at the outcomes for incarceration, there are some studies showing that 60% of boys in foster care later on go to jail. So if you think about this, so for every male foster kid like me who graduates from college, there are 20 who end up going to jail, right? And so I think that this is like, you know, something that we can pay more attention to. Like, why are there foster kids in the first place? Is that a good environment for them? Is it all just about poverty, or are there other things we can be thinking about to create good environments for kids?
Yeah. What do you make about, what do you think is the solution? You that investigate a lot, like what do you think could be a good way of leading with this problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, there probably, I mean, I don't know if there's any like perfect solution to any of this, but I've thought of a couple. So I think one, I was actually just talking to a sociology professor about this. He asked me this interesting question, something like, you know, when I was in high school, he started talking to me, when you were in high school, did you see any, like, did any of your teachers or anyone ever tell you about marriage or family, or like just any kind of advice or anything like this? And none of them ever did. But I do remember seeing this poster in my biology class when I was like 15. And the poster said something like, you know, if you do these three things, you won't be in poverty. It was just a poster on the wall, right, with all these other like posters. It was something like, you know, wait until you're 20 to have kids, like graduate high school, wait until you're 20 to have kids, and like make sure you have a job, or something like that, right? Or get married. It was like, get married, graduate high school, and wait until you're 20 to have kids. And that stuck with me. Like, I don't know if that's the reason why I, you know, whatever, didn't have kids and, you know, ended up graduating high school. But those three things stuck with me, right? Like, that's the one of the things that I remember from high school, and I don't remember that much, you know, in terms of classroom stuff. So I think like maybe printing out like a bunch of those and putting those in every classroom, that you know, that would be one possibility. Maybe drawing more attention to it, or teaching kids this. Because it's actually loosely based on what's called the success sequence, which I think is like, can't remember the scholars who came up with this, but basically they analyzed a bunch of data and found that, like, yeah, if you follow 3 steps, like, you know, your odds of being in poverty are extremely low. And it was something like, yeah, graduate high school, get a full-time job, and get married. And if you do those 3 things, you won't be poor, something like that. Another would be like, basically so we were able to change the culture around cigarette smoking. You know, 50 years ago in the US, it was like, I don't know, 30% of Americans smoked cigarettes. It was just totally widespread. And now, like, smoking has become stigmatized. Like, it's actually kind of like, I don't know, people judge you. Like, people judge people very harshly now for smoking cigarettes. And I think there would be a way to do this, create that same kind of stigma and awareness campaign for children and for families. So, you know, the US government, you know, they would post like posters showing, you know, something like 55,000 Americans die each year from secondhand smoke, or something like that. If we had a poster that said, you know, children raised in 2-parent homes are 5 times more likely to graduate college. I don't know what the numbers are, I'm just making it, but like something like that, right? Like, children who are, you know, raised in a stable environment, whatever, like, yeah, I mean, you could spin it both ways. You could have a positive, which is like, children raised in 2 homes have these positive outcomes. You could also put posters, which would be slightly more controversial, which are children who are raised by single mothers are, you know, twice as likely to go to prison. This sort of public awareness campaign of like, here are the data. You can make up your own mind about this. And slowly, I think we could, you know, change the culture around families and children and child rearing the same way that we did for smoking.
Yeah, and in like seeing your life in retrospective, have you think like parts where it can go like really wrong, that you say like, oh, I was so lucky that that didn't happen, or that I didn't do that, or like, I think there were moments, well, you tell me.
Yeah. I mean, like, so let's see. There were times where I got like, one time in high school, I remember, I mean, yeah, I don't know who your audience is, so I'm just gonna, these are, yeah, who watches this?
It's just like 20 persons, not a lot yet. Don't
No,
worry.
no one's gonna listen to this anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so here's what, this probably won't get me in that much trouble, but I remember, so in high school, I was 17 years old or something. I was blackout drunk driving my car, and I had my best friend in the back seat behind me. He was like buzzed. He wasn't that drunk. And his younger brother was in the passenger seat next to me. So I was like 17, my friend 17 or 18, and his younger brother was like 16, something like that. And yeah, I was just like blackout drunk driving on the freeway. Like I reclined my seat all the way back so I couldn't see anything. And I had my foot like just down on the gas. And I just like, just driving like that. Like basically I couldn't see anything. Yeah, like later got pulled over by the cops. Like keep in mind, like a lot of this memory is, I don't know how accurate it is simply because of, my state of mind. But I remember the cops pulled us over, and one of the things that I learned from a friend's dad, actually, who was a retired police officer, he said that like if you're dealing with cops, like the best way to interact with them is to basically be as polite as possible. Like basically show like a exaggerated amount of respect. And if you're ultra polite and just like super submissive, basically, you'll have a much better chance of not getting fucked up by the cops. And so
That's a smart way of being stupid.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And so this cop pulls over, and like I'm hammered, but like I remember this from my friend's dad, and so I was like, I'm sorry, officer, we were just on our way home, whatever. And he could tell that I was sloshed, and yeah, and basically like he just told my friend in the back seat to drive, just trade places with me, right? And so like that night I could have gone to jail. Who knows what might have happened if I had gotten in a fight with this cop, which I could have. Had I not had that advice in the back of my mind, it's not unlikely that I would have gotten in a fight with him and maybe even be dead. Who knows? And so yeah, basically like, so my friend is driving the car now, and I'm in the back seat, just like hammered, and so I remember the cop was behind us, sort of like, I guess, following us along. And then we
Because
ended up
how old
pulling
were
into,
you?
what was that?
How old were you?
I was 17.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And so the cop was sort of like following, I guess, trailing us to make sure that we didn't do anything else stupid. And then we pulled into this, do you know what a Jack in the Box? It's like a fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay. We pulled into this Jack in the Box, and we're in the drive-thru because like I'm in the back seat, like, screaming about how hungry I am. We pull up to the drive-thru window, and I panic because like I have to throw up, and like I'm thrashing around trying to figure out like how to open the backseat doors. I don't know how. Like it's just too confusing for my dumb brain, my dumb drunk brain. And so I go like between my two friends, right? And I like lean over my friend's lap, because the window is rolled down. The Jack in the Box employee is like giving us our food, and like I grab the food like laying on my friend's lap, and I throw it behind me, and I'm locking eyes with the Jack in the Box employee, and I start throwing up, like just unloading while I'm locking eyes with this I think it was a woman, I want to say, and just like unloading like, I don't know, 15 or 20 beers. And I'm like looking at her, down, up again, and she's just like in shock at this. And I remember like looking over, and there was a car behind us, and this was like 2 or 3 in the morning. The cop behind us, like, or not the car behind us, like is like backing up and like just driving away. So they saw everything, and they're like, I'm not gonna like drive through that puddle of puke. So anyway, like I go back into the back seat after I'm done, and I'm like tearing the bag open with my food. My friend is like calling me stupid. He was like, dude, like you ruined all the food. Like because I flung it back and everything fell out. We pull up like into the parking lot, and the cop is there from earlier, and he's just like looking at us and just kind of like shaking his head. He didn't get out, he didn't say anything, but like he saw what had happened, and he could tell that he saw that it was me. And yeah, didn't do anything. Like my friend like saw him and he was like, oh shit. And then like we back up and ended up driving home that night. But yeah, man. And that was like, that wasn't even the dumbest thing I did, but that's just like one of the safer stories I can tell.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, that's a
man,
crazy
like
story.
that was a night that like, yeah, I could have gotten into a lot of trouble. He could have, yeah, the cop could have just arrested me on the spot if he wanted. I mean, I was clearly messed up. I was clearly drunk. So yeah, yeah, and just got really lucky.
Yeah. I don't know to put it as a talent, but I think you have this ability to identify wisdom in places that people don't, like the poster. Maybe someone would like just walk past it and haven't seen it, and you saw that there was something important there, and when you were in this situation you remember. Like I think that's a kind of talent, or like identifying the important things.
Okay, yeah, yeah, okay, like picking up on things that could help later. Yeah, I guess that
Yeah.
is something that I've like. I guess it's something that's helped me out a lot. I've never thought about it as a talent, but I have like,
Or
and
a
maybe
skill,
yeah,
or I would.
yeah, just this. I think there's something there, right? Like if someone says something that sounds interesting or could be potentially useful, I think it's important to try to remember it because you never know, right? Like there are things that, I mean, yeah, just yeah, you never know when something's going to become useful later to you. And so yeah, I think that, yeah, I mean that's one of the best pieces of advice. I mean, that, let's just say that wasn't my only interaction with police. And yeah, I mean, if I could tell your viewers anything, especially like the younger guys, like if you basically just act like a bitch to the cops, like just totally like submissive, like I'm so sorry, yes sir, whatever, you're going to greatly increase your odds of like just, like the cop will just let you off with a warning, or at the very least like not arrest you, right? Or not kill you. And so yeah, I mean, talking back to cops is like, yeah, it's never a good idea.
Yeah,
You,
that's a great piece of advice.
you can do that later, right? Like you can argue with them later, but in the moment, like when they're deciding what to do with you, yeah, don't try to test them. So
Yeah, make it clear that you're on their side, that you're not gonna do anything stupid.
right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but this ability that I see on you, I think it gets reflected also on your Twitter, like the extract of literature you put, like they're well taught, like they're, I don't know, I see they're also like well identified. So I think that gets reflected on what you share. I don't know what to think about it.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, like when I'm reading and like going through papers and books and sometimes videos too. Like I'll pull out an excerpt from a podcast or something and share it. And yeah, I mean, I just share things that are interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, I figure like if something's interesting to me, it's probably going to be interesting to other people. Um, and I guess like over time though, especially in the last year or so, I've sort of gotten a feel for what people are interested in, at least with regards to psychology, with social class, with the kinds of things that I've been looking into and researching. Yeah, to try to pinpoint the gems within like these mountains of rocks, and you're crushing through them, and like, oh, here's something that's super interesting that might be something that people would find useful or valuable in some way. So yeah, it's been great to share things that I learned with the world.
Yeah, and I think, well, it's almost the hour. I think a good question to wrap things up. Like you share a lot of extracts from books, and you read a lot. So there was this thing you share. I am almost certain it was you that like there was an experiment that if a chimp went to another social group and he knew a more effective way of cracking a nut, he wouldn't share it with a new group.
Right.
Was it
Yeah.
you? Yeah. And
I
like,
think
what do
I've
you make of this? Or sometimes you read something like, what do I make of this? Like, I don't.
yeah. I mean that I've shared that. I've seen it go around too. Other people have commented on it, but yeah, that to me is a fascinating finding. I mean, basically the idea was that like if a chimp learns a very efficient way to crack nuts in their troop, and then the chimp becomes, for whatever reason, joins another group, completely different social group of chimps, and they use a different way of cracking nuts, but it's less efficient. It's slower in some way, or just not as good. This chimp, even though they have superior nut cracking knowledge, will just do what the other chimps are doing, use the less efficient, less effective way of cracking nuts. They'll just copy what other people are doing. One way to think about that, there are a lot of, there's some disagreement about like how generalizable, studies of apes are for humans and so on. But one way to look at that is, basically this chimpanzee has, not consciously, of course, but some part of them, implicitly is making these cost benefit calculations. What is the smartest thing to do here? And encoded in this chimp is basically like fit in, blend in with the group, do what the other chimps are doing. If you stand out and use this other nut cracking technique, you could draw unwanted attention on yourself. You could stand out in some way that could be risky. And there are some parallels to human beings too, right? Like I would like to think that, at least in, some human cultures, sort of bringing back this new useful technology or idea could be valuable, but sometimes it's not, right? Like sometimes you learn a new idea or a new technique or something, and people don't want to hear it. They don't want to get involved with it. They want to distance themselves. They want to do what they've always done before. And so, yeah, people make these sort of calculations too. Do I want to share this new information? Do I not? People are concerned with, of course, like finding the best ways to survive. One way of maximizing your odds of survival is to learn the best way to collect food or something like that. Interacting with the physical world in, sort of reality on reality's terms, how to do things that make sense on a truthful, factual basis. But we also have this concern with how we appear to other people, with our social circles, with our groups. We want to fit in with them. We want to blend in. We want to, obtain prestige and status from these people. And that's also related to survival, by the way. So both of these, obtaining food is related to survival, but also maintaining the good graces of your social community is related to survival, because in the ancestral environment, humans can't survive without a community. And so we feel panic and fear and anxiety when people in our peer group judge us negatively, because that feeling was adaptive for our ancestors. That feeling basically alerted them to say like, hey, like if you keep doing this, you could die, basically. That's what that feeling is. And so, yeah, people make these trade-offs, right? Like, should I tell these people this thing? Should I tell the truth? Should I, and so on. And yeah, I just read this book, and I did a review of it too, by Cass Sunstein, called Conformity. And one of the observations he makes, so Cass Sunstein, he's a lawyer, I think a behavioral economist too, basically says that like, how you act in a group always depends on the group's aims. Like if the group's aim is to reach the truth, and then of course, like revealing how you actually feel and how you actually think about things will help the group to obtain their goals of, the objective is, what is the truth here? How do we get to the truth? You should say what's on your mind in that case. But if the group's goal is to have a good time, to have positive emotions all around, to, whatever, like just basically like have a positive environment, in that case, maybe telling the truth isn't a good idea. Maybe saying what's on your mind isn't the best move. So it's always important, I think, to keep in mind so if you're in a group and you're thinking about what to say, it's important to keep in mind, what is the aim of this group? Are we trying to tell the truth, or are we trying to have a good time and to boost each other's status?
Yeah, and I think this piece of information caught my attention, especially because I'm entering college right now. So okay. I think some of like have a clear path and know what they're gonna do with their life, and like maybe a little better structure, and others are a little more confused. So when someone starts talking about like their plans and what they have accomplished and things like that, the others feel kind of uncomfortable, and the others also sense like, oh, I think I take it too far. like I need to not make them feel inferior. So I will stop so I can be part of the group and accept it. And I think this happens in a lot of situations. So
Oh
maybe
yeah.
the right thing to do is like maybe change of group, or maybe as you like find one with the aim of that's um, parallel to yours. Like I think it's not like this is what happened in human nature like this. Like no, there's ways to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this, I just tweeted this paper, retweeted it, about fear of positive evaluation, which is basically like, of course, we all feel a little bit uncomfortable when we're insulted or when people judge us negatively, you know, our competence or something about us negatively. But a lot of people actually feel uncomfortable in this kind of way you're describing when they experience praise, right? Like when people sort of shower praise on people, they also feel this weird discomfort. And one reason might be like people don't want to attract the envy or the anger of other people by standing out in a positive way too much. And so I think this could be one reason. I know what you're talking about. There is this feeling of like, I don't want to feel like I'm bragging or
Yeah.
something like that. No, that's important. There's this book, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She writes about this idea called truth pods. And it's basically this idea is that, you know, so many people, the goal of the group and the community is to, you know, have good emotions and to not offend anyone. But a truth pod is something like a small community of people, small group, maybe just a few friends, where your goal is actually to get at the truth. So you can set up your own little community. I have friends like this. And for the most part, yeah, we do try to understand the truth, share facts, say what's on our mind. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you actually have to set up these communities in the first place. I think it tells us a little bit of human nature in itself, that we need to actually consciously create that, because yeah, truth isn't always the most important thing to us.
Yeah, that's right. I saw you wrote an article about Jordan Peterson, and he made
Yeah.
a really cool statement about this, that people say like, oh, I want to be famous and I want the spotlight. And he makes the question like, do you really want the spotlight? He put the example of the zebras, like they camouflage between them, not with the environment, but between them. And when you put an X in one of them, the lions go after it. So like they know who's the target. And I think it relates to what you were saying.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah. I remember him making that analogy in one of his videos. Yeah. Blending in with each other. That's, yeah, that was an incredible insight, I think. And yeah, I think a lot of people do that. I mean,
It's a good
yeah.
strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
Depends.
more safe
Yeah.
path.
Depends on your goals, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is like blending in for the most part. I mean, I think, yeah, Peterson's also said something like, unless you have a very good reason not to, you should do what other people are doing. You know, this is like, I mean, if a lot of other people have done something, that suggests that there is a value in that, right? Like at the very least, those people aren't dead. And so if you do what they do, you're not going to die too. And so, yeah, I think there is this value in that, but yeah, there are some people who, you know, take more risks.
Yeah, you need to be convinced and well informed, and like trust yourself that it's like you need to risk in something, but not in everything. So I think you should pick a path and go to there.
Absolutely. Yeah, man.
Well, so do you want to say something to close up this?
Uh,
Wrap it up? A
yeah, I
piece of
mean,
advice or something? Or where
I
we
mean,
can find
nothing
you?
in particular in terms of advice. No, man, this was great.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me, and yeah, I
No,
really
thanks for
enjoyed
coming.
this. Yeah, yeah,
I,
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I believe like I threw a Hail Mary and like oh maybe Rob will say yes, but you did, so it was good. Thank you
Yeah,
for
yeah, of course,
the
man.
talk.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk when I have the time. But yeah, send me the links to everything, and yeah, I'll be happy to share and whatever. So
Oh, perfect. It was a pleasure talking to you.
yeah,
And well, we'll be seeing each other on Twitter there, or later we'll see.
absolutely. All right, Pablo. Thanks, man.
Yeah. If
Take
you come
care.
to Mexico, send me a text or something.
Yeah, man. Let me know if you're ever in the UK. If you ever come to London for any reason, let me know.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Well,
Cheers, man.
thanks a lot. See you.